All right, so we've learned about aggregate demand, aggregate supply. Let's look at the equilibrium. So there's going to be two different equilibriums going on here, and we have them both kind of highlighted on the next slide. But essentially, there's going to be a short-run equilibrium and a long-run equilibrium. In the short-run equilibrium, just think about it as where the AD and the AS curve intersect, or the SRAS curve intersect. And the long-run equilibrium is a situation when all three of them intersect. So what I mean here is if we have a situation where the AD and AS do not intersect over wherever the LRAS curve is, we're in a situation where we are not in a long-run equilibrium. If it's on the other side, the same thing as well. The only time that we will be in the long-run equilibrium is when we have this situation where they all intersect. So often in questions on exams, you will see, or questions in the book, that they will say we start in a long-run macroeconomic equilibrium. What that means when it says we start in a long-run macroeconomic equilibrium, this is the situation that we mean. Because in this situation here, we're going to notice that unless something shifts aggregate demand or something shifts aggregate supply, things are happy here. We're happy at point A in the sense that nothing's going to want to move. But if we had the intersection point to the left here or to the right, things would not be stable. Let's just put it that way. So at potential output, we have that situation that it's stable because we're producing at a natural rate of unemployment. So we're not in a boom and we're not in a slump. So we're going to look at both of those. So if we have a situation where we produce less than potential output, so let's say potential output is here. So I'll just write it the way I normally do, which is a little bit simpler than writing it all out like the book does. Well, if I'm in this situation here, I'm producing less than potential output. I'm not producing as many chairs, as many pens, as many cars as possible. Therefore, I'm in a recession. So think about it this way, that this situation there is a recession. Why? Because output is lower, and output is lower means I also have a lot of unemployed people. On the other hand, it is possible to be on the other side. And this other side here would be a boom. If we produce more than potential output, we're in a boom phase. We're in an inflationary output gap. Okay, so instead of just calling it a boom, we're going to say that the difference between Y1 and Y star, or Y2 and Y star, is a gap. There is a gap, and it's either a recessionary output gap, so you could add the word here, output gap, or an inflationary output gap. There is a gap that's on that side. But why do we say it's inflationary? We'll see what brings us back to this equilibrium will lead to a certain level of an inflation if we just let the economy recover on its own. So if we have a boom phase, which is that inflationary output gap I was talking about, firms experience a high profit in that situation there. So we're in this situation over here where firms experience a high profit. We're producing a lot more. This is our Y star. In this situation here, they're going to demand for a lot of workers. A lot of workers will be in demand. So I was saying here is normal work weeks. Here you might be working overtime. A lot of people want to hire you. You're in that situation that you're like, gosh, I could work for this company. I could work for this other company. We're in a boom phase. So naturally, wages and production costs will go up because a lot of people will try to get you. A buddy of mine, really successful friend, he was in this situation of his life, he was kind of in demand. He was asked to switch jobs. He was offered another job. And when he went to see his previous employer with this idea saying like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'll have to let you guys go unless you could do something, they actually paid him about 40% more overnight to keep doing the same job so he wouldn't leave. So if you're in that inflationary phase where a lot of people are in high demand, people will ask for higher wages. As people ask for higher wages, naturally this AS curve with higher wages, we said, would shift left. So AS curve will shift left. And if I go from this point here, don't worry about the long run macroeconomic equilibrium point, but let's just say I started here at point A. Well, going to point B, just this on its own leads to an increase in the price. That's why we often coin, sorry for striking through, an inflationary output gap. Whereas on the other side, we're in a recessionary output gap. So here, not producing as much as I could. Okay, so in this situation here, I'm not producing as much as I could. I'm producing less. So demand for labor is low. Typically, wages and production costs would fall. Well, why do you say wages would fall? Well, if you're in a business and the economy's not doing so well, they're going to start firing people. And if they don't fire people, what they might do is they say, well, times are tough. We're going to give you, not give you, but we're going to maybe say you could keep working for us if you accept a salary cut. That's really hard to swallow. We're going to talk about wages being sticky downwards. Sticky downwards is that it's really sticky when you ask for wages to go down. It's like people are reluctant to accept lower wages. Let's say you earn $50,000 and you've got your car and everything else, all your payments. If your employer comes to see you and says, I'm willing to offer you $55,000, you're going to sign right away. If your employer, on the other hand, says, I'm going to have to start paying you only $45,000, you're going to be like, whoa, wait a minute. And you're really going to offer a lot of resistance, typically. So wages are sticky downwards. So this process is going to take time. But like I said, when I talked about inflation a few chapters ago, what might they offer that's easier to accept is they'll say, well, we're just going to freeze your salary for the next few years. So wages going down, or we could talk about a salary freeze. A salary freeze with inflation is the same thing as saying that wages will go down over time. So as this happens, aggregate supply curve will eventually make it down to here to a new equilibrium if we have that situation that goes on. So this is how the economy recovers from these ups and downs in a laissez-faire economy. What I mean is here is there's, at this stage here, there is no government intervention. So there's no fiscal policy or monetary policy, which we'll see more in detail next chapter. None of that's going on. This is just letting the economy recover on its own. And it's always going to do this till we go back to this long-run equilibrium. If we're in a slight recession or in a slight boom, things will kind of eventually merge back. So that's why I said earlier that this graph here is the long-run equilibrium. Because if we're over here for some reason, the AS curve shifted over here, this point here is not stable. Because this output, this actual output level is different than the potential output level or the natural level of output level. Same thing as if we were somewhere else. So now that we know why the equilibrium moves back to this long run equilibrium and how it can do so naturally, we're going to look at some of the factors that cause economic fluctuations that make us go into a recessionary output gap or inflationary output gap, how it would recover, and we'll put a little spin. We'll talk a little bit about government intervention, but it's really in the next chapter that we'll get into that in more detail.